Happy Sunday!
Happy Sunday.
That was weak. I don't know what's going on here. Just because we have like one last couple, we can't say Happy Sunday together. What's going on? I'm sad. You know, they have on Apple TV, they've bought the rights to the Peanuts show. And so I have at my leisure a whole brand new library of Peanuts pictures. That's where this comes from that show. There. So we have so you're in luck. We have more Peanuts available to us as we go forth from here. Ah! Oh, thought I didn't have a clicker. That would have been bad. I have to rely on Michaela, and you have to hear me say, next slide, next slide. But unfortunately, that doesn't have to happen. All right, so, happy Sunday?
Happy Sunday.
Oh, it's better, thank you. We are doing Sermon on the Mount. Today's message is entitled, Been There, Done That. Been there, done that. We didn't read the, you know what, well, yes you do. We're doing, of course, it's Matthew 5:7, clearly. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Got it? It was fast. Don't worry. This will be all sorts of uncomfortable for everybody here before it's all over with. This one's going to be pretty penetrating. Let's start with a story about a couple of guys. We're going to call them twins because that's what they are. Anyways, this is way back in the day when life was a little bit simpler. No electronics. People used to play outside all the time, and that's just the way it was. It was a nice small town, things like that, and the father of the twins owned a department store in town. We're trying to remember what ours was called. Murphy's, I think it was back in the day. You guys remember Murphy's? It was a department store in our town. I used to, when we walked through Bedford, through town, we used to go in the back door, which we knew the way in, and walk through Murphy's just because we thought it was cool, and then go out the front door and down the way. Anyways, these twins were always together. They wore the same clothes, they looked the same, and they're always together, which means it made it hard for anybody to really date them, so they never did get married. But they did eventually take over the family store, the department store. And it was said they were a model of creative collaboration because they were twins. And they just were good for the town. Anyways, one day, they were working diligently, doing whatever, and the one brother left $1 on top of the cash register. And he went and helped somebody. And when he came back, the $1 was missing. Where'd that $1 go? It was just $1, $1. So he asked his brother, hey, did you see that $1 that was on the cash register? He said, no, I didn't see it. But he couldn't let it drop. So he asked his brother again, where's that? Are you sure you haven't seen that $1? He says, no. No, and I don't know, I don't think I like your insinuation. And then it got out of control, and before you know it, there's a partition going through the middle of the store. And each brother owns one side, now they're in competition with each other. And that's the way it was for 20 years after that. 20 years, $1. About 20 years later, this car pulls up, out-of-state license plate on it. Guy comes out and he talks to one of the brothers. Asks him, have you been here for a while and things like that? Yeah, more than 20 years and things like that. So you're the guy I want to talk to. Listen, about 20 years ago, I was raised as a Christian and everything. I was, but I was down, I was out, I was hungry, I haven't eaten, I had no money, I just got off the boxcar, and I saw that $1. And I gave in to temptation, and I took that $1, he says. I said, but I managed to survive, I've made something of myself, and since then, I've lived with that guilt. It was too much for me, and I wanted to come back and pay back this $1, and I want to give you the interest on whatever damages has been done because of this $1. And when he got done talking about this whole thing, the brother had his head down, he was weeping, he was crying, the guy didn't understand what was going on, and he took him by the arm and he said, if you could tell my other brother, it'd be great. And then they were both with their heads down and both weeping, both crying. Situation. For $1. Now, from the outside looking in, there was no mentions, nothing being mentioned that they were Christians or anything like that. But you could assume that. The day and the age, it was pretty consistent. They may have gone to church, evangelicals possibly, right? But here's the problem. They're unforgiving spirits. that has been revealed in their hearts meant that they had never, ever understood God's mercy. Never. Sounds callous. And this will be an uncomfortable day for us today. Maybe not. Maybe that could be not for anybody here. You just learned about it. But that's what we're going to talk about here today, right? The fifth beatitude. Blessed are the merciful, for it is they that shall obtain mercy. It's a great background for those that might be harboring a little bit of bitterness in their life. Bitterness, right? Have you ever taken a lemon, right? Cut it, and then just bite right into it? That's not bitter, though. That's sour. And so there's some people that love sour. Now, if you want bitter, take the cap off of one of these things and take a little chug. Right? That is apple cider vinegar. That's bitter. That's the very definition of bitter right there. Right? It stays with you for a little bit. The experience is very lasting, and you won't forget it very, very fast. Maybe that's why they like to associate the word bitter with relationships. So I got to wondering. We use bitter a lot with relationships and holding grudges and things like that. So I was wondering, if I got the definition for bitter as it applies to food, will it translate over to relationships? They have a whole different definition, they do, but will it apply? And so I looked it up. Bitter, having a sharp, pungent taste or smell, not sweet. That translates quite nicely. There's nothing sweet about having a bitter attitude, is there? But the difference is this. Here's the difference. The difference is, if let's say you did take a big gulp thinking it was something else, right? And you've gone through the phases and probably drinking some water and trying to get that out, you won't spend the rest of your life hating it. You'll just have a little bit more respect for it. Coffee's bitter, but you drink that because we have some respect for it and use it in a good and proper way. But when it comes to relationships, oh no, that's something else altogether different. We love to hold grudges as a people. Why is it so hard to forgive for people, I wonder? Because it is. You go through 2 to 3 people down the road. One of them is going to say, oh yeah, they're holding a grudge against somebody. Most likely. We might be even doing it right here, right now. Maybe it's not hard to forgive somebody. If that's your answer, hold your answer for a minute. Think about it when we get finished. You may think differently at the end. You may think differently at the end. Let's start out with separating the word mercy with the word grace. They're not the same thing. We like to maybe put it all together. They're not, right? Because grace is shown to the undeserving. We are undeserving of God's grace. We don't deserve it. Mercy, on the other hand, is compassion to the miserable. So you could probably then say, without being wrong, that a synonym of mercy is compassion. But just because you're compassionate to somebody doesn't mean you're merciful. Now, it's a lot of backwards talking, I understand. We'll clear all this up. We will. Mercy exists when something has been done to alleviate distress of somebody. Right? The best way to understand merciful and everything else would be the story of the Good Samaritan. And we're going to visit the story twice to understand a couple of things. Make sure I say this right. I want to make sure I don't start wrong. What happened? Okay, so we have this fellow. He's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And before you know it, he fell into some thieves. And they beat him, they robbed him, and they left him for dead. But that's not the end of the story, is it? 3 people passed him by. A priest, a Levite, a Levite? I said that right, Levite? And a Samaritan. The priest comes out, he sees him there, crosses the street, whistles, pretends he doesn't see him. The Levite, same thing, pretends he doesn't see him, moves to the other side of the street, and then the Samaritan comes along. He sees him, and then he acts. He bandages him up, he carries him all the way to an inn, he puts him into a bed, he pays for the room, and then he goes to the guy that runs the inn and says, hey, I need you to take care of this guy, I can't stay. But here's some money to take care of him. And when I come back, if it costs more than this money to take care of him, I'll reimburse you. And then Jesus asks the guy who's talking to him at the time, who's the one That was the better neighbor. I think it was the better neighbor. And it says, well, the third guy. It says, yeah, which of these do you think was a neighbor? I'll say, yeah, I wrote it down. Who do you think was a better neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Well, the third guy was. Yes, that's right. The one who had mercy on him. That's the one who had mercy. That's the one. Mercy is compassion to the miserable. And that guy was certainly, if he was left for dead, he was miserable. Now, here's what I want you to remember, because we're going to say this a little bit later on. Then I'll highlight the sentence I want you to remember. Right? He was left for dead by the robbers, but he was not left for dead just by the robbers. He was left for dead by the priest and by the Levite as well. Right? Here's what I want you to remember. They were as responsible to what has happened to this man as the robbers were. As responsible, because they left him for dead. Right? So we need to marinate on that for a minute, because this is going to come up again a number of times here a little bit later on. They were as responsible. But does it matter that maybe the priest is giving money to the homeless on the way into the temple, maybe? You think that was okay? He left him for dead. I don't think he knows mercy. I don't. That's going to be kind of important. While grace and mercy are separated, forgiveness and mercy, on the other hand, are latched together. They're latched together. They work together. The New Testament will go out of its way to tell you about forgiveness and mercy, especially as it applies to you, depending on how you use it. For example, it says in James, judgment without mercy is going to be applied to all those that can't seem to use mercy on themselves. He's talking about, in another parable, about the unforgiving servant. And he says a little bit about the warning on that. So my Heavenly Father is going to be probably pretty unmerciful to you, right? For every one of you that do not forgive your brother. There's that forgive with the mercy, your brother or sister from your heart. And that always makes me think about the Lord's Prayer, right? The Lord's Prayer. It says, forgive me my trespasses as I forgive those who trespass against me. As I'm the one forgiving, please forgive me just like that. So if you're not forgiving, what am I expecting the Lord to do for me? And in case that wasn't good enough, if you look at that prayer, and this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, so we'll get into it pretty extensively here after a number of weeks or whatever when it's time to get there. It has a little blurb at the end of it which says, for if you forgive others their trespasses, if you do, then yeah, you're probably going to get forgiven. However, if you don't you be expecting anything. Mercy and forgiveness, right at the hip. Right at the hip. I jumped ahead too far, and I was just skipping along. So now it's time for us to figure out the word. The word. The one word that we always like to do a deep dive into. And there's only one word I can see in there that's probably going to apply. Which one do you think it is? Any guesses? That's right, it's merciful. I will pretend somebody said something. It's merciful. We're going to look into that one today. That's the one that's going to define the entire verse for us today. I did it. I put a little merciful thing there. Where are we at here? There it is. I decided to go ahead and start with the society's definition of what merciful is. And for that I went into Merriam-Webster, which says, merciful is providing relief. That's as generic and plain vanilla as it gets, I think. And if we were to take that definition, does that really provide the context that Jesus is talking about when he says, blessed are the merciful? No, I don't think so at all. That might be that's the film on the water before you even plunge in and see how deep the water is. Right? The Greek word for merciful is lelemon. not sure if I said that correctly, but I'm not going to show it to you because when you look at that definition, that's fairly generic also. Not always. If you get an exegetical reference, you'll see that there's lots to be said about the word merciful from the Greek word. And when they do it, they don't look at it from the Greek context. They go a little bit further. They go to the Hebrew word, and that's chesed. Now that has got depth, and there's a lot to that one. Because it doesn't simply mean to provide relief, simply sympathize, feel sorry, at a distance do something without any feeling. It doesn't mean all that. It means literally to get inside somebody's mind and somebody's head, to see the way they're seeing, feel the way they are feeling, to actually know the misery they feel. That's the context of merciful. It is a very emotional, very personal way in which we engage with this feeling that Jesus is talking about here today. It identifies a sympathy which is not given from the outside or at arm's reach. You need to be kind of close, very personal, like I said, right? The word sympathy itself, the English word sympathy, that comes from a couple of Greek words that they just mashed together. And that, without going through each word, means in the end experiencing things together with other people. Why that's not in the dictionary, I don't know. Experiencing things together with, literally knowing what they're going through. Sounds difficult. Pastor, how am I supposed to know exactly what they're going through? There's ways. There's ways. I'll give you an example. It might be kind of an extreme example, I'll admit. But I'm in the Middle East. It's getting ready for the war. Me and Wendy don't know where each other's at. It's a different story. And I'm at the port. See, the war hasn't kicked off. It's about to. It's just right there and on nose. It's about to. But it's boring sitting in that camp. Boring. And they said, we need a detail to unload a couple of container ships of all the vehicles. Get me out of here. And besides, it's a bunch of vehicles. I get to drive a bunch of vehicles, which is kind of funny because I'm in a maintenance unit. And I've driven enough vehicles, I have. But when I got to a couple of layers below the container, there's some M1 Abrams, some track vehicles. I'm like, oh, look at that. It's just us. How do we get these off? So I run upstairs to the motor pool sergeant. I said, hey, can you drive an Abrams? How do you start one up? And he tells me, and I'm being really careful listening. So I run downstairs and I jump in. I can drive this, but I couldn't start the thing up. The first sergeant for the unit shows up and he yells at me, what are you doing? I don't know. I'm trying to take this off the ship. He shows me and I got to drive it off the ship. It was great. It took a day or so to unload this ship. There's a lot of vehicles on there. The next day, during the daytime, and I don't know when, the siren goes off. Incoming. Right? So we've been lobbing things back and forth. The war hadn't really started. And so we gingerly make our ways to the bunker, because normally these sirens mean nothing. And a few moments after we get there, slam! This massive scud hits us right in the water. Missed everything, but hit the water. And the concussion, the sound was unbelievable. I remember in Graf, in the range, where they'll shut things down and allow the planes to drop their payloads for practice, and you can feel the concussion for that. And you can feel the waves of sound when the tanks are practicing, but nothing prepares you for it being right there on top of you. Now the thing is, I was in a what did I say I was in? I was in a bunker. I was in a bunker. It's a big concrete thing for safety. But not everybody was in a bunker. The little guys, the workers there, the little blue dudes. I call them little blue dudes. What are they called?
Those locals?
They were still out. They're just looking around. What's going on? And as soon as that happened, I'm like, oh man, those guys were out there. They were out there. I didn't have to be out there to know I wouldn't want to be out there. I didn't have to experience everything they went through to know that's bad. And there wasn't another siren that went off that we didn't have enough bunkers for everybody. Because I wouldn't want to be out there. I know that bunker would have protected me from everything minus a direct hit. That's how big these bunkers are. Well, I didn't have to be. So there are ways for us to know there's something going on over here. And I don't have to experience it exactly to have some kind of empathy for what's going on, right? That this experiencing things or even wanting to understand is something precisely people try to avoid to do. They don't want to do it. People are much more concerned about their own feelings. Number one, what's in it for me? I don't need to give up that kind of time. They're concerned for their own feelings, and they don't really have time to figure out what your feelings are going on. Do I feel bad? Yes, sure. Am I concerned? To a degree. But under no circumstances will this become personal. And I'm not going to shed a tear. That's not happening. This is known as outside feelings. Again, it's kind of like that whole arms reach thing. Don't want to make the deliberate effort to get inside another person's mind and heart. I don't want to do that. If we did if we had people that are more, I guess, accepting of trying to get inside another person's mind and find out what it is they're feeling, so much more could happen. 3 things to be precise. First one is this. We could have unintentional kindness rectified. What? Unintentional kindness? Yeah, there's such a thing as kindness that just goes horribly wrong. Horribly wrong. A good example of that is something we got coming up here pretty soon. And that's Jesus is on his way to the cross. Jesus is on his way to the cross, and he's going to take a little break. He's going to take a break in the one place that is the most comfortable for him. Friends are there, and he wants to rest. There's some anxiety going on. I want to make sure I said this exactly right. Right? The cross is just a few days away, and he's very aware. This is one of those things where one might say, how am I supposed to know what he's feeling? There's a way. There's a way. A good example would be Michaela. She, like a champ, can work herself into a frothy anxiety. Just a couple of years ago, she was taking the ACTs. I'll tell you what. She got herself so worked up that when she went out the door that day, she left the doors open, she left the lights on, she left the stove on. Now, you could look at this 2 different ways. Like, what are you doing? Or you could say, oh, I know that anxiety. I know what that's like. Because you do. You know what that's like. You can have some sympathy for what's going on inside of her head. The cross is coming. And Jesus is absolutely, acutely aware of what's about to happen. And so he's in our bodies. So he has some built up energy going on. And he just wants it to sort of just rest for him, take a breath before the final lap comes up. All he wanted was an opportunity to rest. But Martha loves Jesus. She loves Jesus. And she's going to do something really kind for him. So let me read it down. And she's going to provide the very best meal. Now, she hustles, she bustles, she scurried, she moves, she clattered, and she is so intent on making sure things are perfect. And it's going to be her kindness and her decision on what perfect is. And Mary, you need to start helping. Make her help, Jesus. Is that what Jesus wants? No. No, he said as much. There's a couple of things going on here. Mary chose the right one, he says. Right? I don't know what's going through what Jesus said, but I can stop and think about it for a minute. Maybe this, but we like to have kindness on our terms. Here's what I believe kindness is. But if we just crawled into somebody else's mind and see what's going on, maybe we won't make that mistake and make things worse. We don't want to make things worse. I wanted, she didn't mean to. She had good intentions. Right? She had good intentions. If we would just make the effort. Number 2. All right? If we would just make that effort, it would make forgiveness, tolerance, and mercy way easier. Way easier. We just made that. there's a life lesson. It's a life lesson. What I put down is a principle, a life principle that we just maybe consider once in a while, right? There is always a reason why people think and act as they do. Always. We don't consider that. We always like to think things on our end. And then we're making snap judgments, right? We are. Oh my God. The mistake we often make is we like to see things through our eyes. And we decide things through our opinion. How many times do we see people begging for money on the side street and say, well, they don't really need my money. They're just hustling. Why don't they get a job? How do you know they can? I've long since quit doing that. There's this guy, we kind of make a joke out of it. And he's on the street corner on the way down from Cuyahoga Falls. He's a fire victim. He's been a fire victim since the day I've been here. But I may say, oh, there's fire guy. But every time I stop, I give him money because I'm done making those judgments. I actually saw him the other day. I asked Wendy, so how much money do you think I've given him so far? If we make these judgments, something bad's going to happen. I'll give you an example. There's a show called Brain Games. Ever see it? I love it. It really helps us see how we start thinking, right? And so they had this one exercise, to show us how we think a little bit, things like that. And the conditions was a park where people are walking. And they had different people under different circumstances kind of fall in the middle of the park. They didn't just sort of fall skin. It was a little crumble type things, fall down. And in almost every single case, people would, are you okay? You all right? You okay? So basically, good people, yeah? Yeah, basically. There was this one example that rises above all the rest that I want us to be sort of cognizant of. They had this white fellow, middle-aged, and dressed in kind of business casual. And he was walking through the park, not like that, a little different. It's the only good park picture I could find. And he crumbles to the ground. Right away, within seconds, are you okay? Everything fine? Good to go? Got a little dizzy, you know. They used actors. No, fine, I'm good. They waited a little while, wait till people had gone by. Then he did the exact same thing. The exact same thing. The exact same person. Exact same clothes. But this time he was holding a bottle in a paper bag. And he crumbled to the ground, and nobody helped this man. They all walked on by. After the time went by, nobody was helping this guy, and he would sort of wriggle a little bit, maybe groan. They finally, okay, that's enough. They got up, and he showed the cameras, hid cameras. It's iced tea. Iced tea was in that bag. It is at this time I'd like to point out what I just said about the Levite and the priest walking on by and being absolutely guilty of not being merciful. If we would just stop and consider their situation, maybe mercy and forgiveness might be a little bit easier to spread. Maybe. Number 3. It's what Jesus did. It's exactly what God did through Jesus. Came down, God in man, sees with our eyes, thinks like us, feels our pain, our joys, our failures. If it happened in a lifetime, He's experienced it. Did He lose a family member? How many of His family members were sitting at the cross? Just His mother. He's experienced what we've experienced. God knows what life is like because He came to experience life like us. Right? That was supposed to be up earlier. If the world hates you, welcome to the club. Been there, done that. A little reference to the title of our sermon today. That's why this whole thing, He has a very unique perspective that nobody else can say. You ever hear the story about Queen Elizabeth? I don't know if I've heard it that many times, but she lost her husband, Prince Edwards, I guess it is, right? Yeah. And she took it hard. It was back in I wrote that down, 61. Prince Albert. I was wrong, Prince Albert. Anyway, she took it hard. She grieved, wore black, didn't really mingle with people too much. You know, she had to process. Anyways, she's a queen. So she doesn't get very many news things going on. But she did hear one time about another woman who lost her husband kind of young as well, grieving. She heard about this. She goes and calls on this person. And on her way in, and this person's name is Mrs. Tulloch. Miss Tulloch. She's announced. The queen gets announced. And as she's on her couch, and she hears the queen, and she tries to scramble up to curtsy to be. And the queen says, "Oh, hang tight. I'm not coming to you today as a queen to a subject, but as one woman who has lost her husband to another woman who has lost her husband." Because this queen, she uniquely, regardless of class, of where people are at, understood exactly what this woman was going through. Jesus understands exactly what we were going through. And as I recall correctly, we're to try to be like Christ. Yeah, that be holy. That's just part of it. Mercy is compassion in action. We can't imagine it's because we feel compassionate, we're merciful. It doesn't work that way. I remember saying that mercy is tied up with forgiveness, yeah? The example of that would be Joseph. That's a great example. The brothers are tired of him. Threw him in a pit. We're going to kill him. But brothers, one brother, I think one, maybe two, said, "I don't know, maybe we shouldn't. Here comes a caravan. Let's sell him. Let's at least get something for it." And then they'll tell Dad that he died. Which is what they did. A number of years later, the brothers literally at his mercy. Big famine going on. Literally at his mercy. He had compassion. He actually excused himself to go in the back room to wail and cry because he was able to understand their pain and suffering. Now, he played with them a little bit, I suppose, but he met their needs entirely, forgiveness entirely, raised them back up in grace. He said, and this comes in Genesis 50:20, he says, "I know you intended this to harm me, but it wasn't God's plan." Because merciful people remembers mercy from God. They'll remember that, and they'll work from that position. It is blessed are those, the blessed are merciful, for those and those alone will receive mercy. From the context of merciful that we understand it, it is those people alone that will receive mercy. James, judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who hasn't given mercy in that context. Now, some people will take all this that we've said because it kind of, if you want to lean in the wrong direction or read into it, they'll say, "Well, I can work for my mercy, my forgiveness by working at it, by giving mercy." That doesn't work out that way. The Bible doesn't support that. Grace alone. Grace alone. And look no further than the thief on the cross who had time to do one thing, and that's come clean. And Jesus said, "Assuredly, I say to you, this day with me in heaven." No baptism, no mercy, no forgiveness, none of the stuff that people claim you must do, because it is grace alone. Well, let's not lose track of what we're talking about here today. The beatitude we're talking about here today is for those that are truly God's children. They are objects of His mercy. We are objects of His mercy. And the byproduct of that position is mercy being shown. Right? Showing mercy is the evidence that we have received mercy. Right? This is a very penetrating truth, and we could look at this with like a litmus test. And this is where things get uncomfortable and people don't want to hear this very much. The first is this. There's two of them. If we have no mercy towards those who are physically and emotionally in distress, then Christian would not be how we should describe ourselves. Notice I didn't say that we become Christians because we show mercy. We continue to remember it's a byproduct of the mercy we've received. This is precisely the point of the Good Samaritan. Right? If we back this up a little bit, you'll notice there's some people around Jesus who's doing the teaching thing. The one guy that's speaking is a lawyer, but Jesus is speaking to the greater amount of people. And he talks about the great Shema. Now the Shema is this big, long Jewish thing that they repeat every single day. And within it, it says, loving God with all of one's might and one's neighbor as oneself, which is exactly what the law of the love is, right? And so the lawyer asks Jesus, how do I get eternal salvation? How does that happen? He says, well, you got to do that whole law thing, he says. And he says, you shall love, this is right before the Samaritan. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And then he goes through the whole story about the Samaritan. And then so who's the one showing mercy? Right? And so what he's pointing out is that the priest, and he made specific points, priest and Levite, they did not love their neighbor as themselves. They didn't do it. They did not love their neighbor. Thus they failed to fulfill the law and were entirely lost. Entirely. Not a little bit, not close enough, entirely. If we remain impassive or callous to human needs and refuse to do anything about it, we need to kind of maybe take a long look at our behavior patterns, maybe. Right? Maybe. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need but doesn't show any pity, how can the love of God be in that person? But that, I guarantee you, that's rarely repeated in church. People don't want to hear it. They don't want to see it. They don't want to think about themselves with this. It makes people far too uncomfortable. True belief is never to be divorced from attitude and action. And we've said action a great many times in the past number of years. The second test is nearly like the first one. Right? If we refuse to exercise mercy by extending forgiveness, again, Christian might not be the word we should use for ourselves. Forgiveness demonstrates whether we have been forgiven in the first place. It's not just that. You are forgiven. Other people are forgiven. Mercy is to be had. But you have to know it and feel it and be generous about it. So we're going to go back to that story with the unmerciful servant. The unmerciful servant. He owed his master somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $50 million. Impossible to pay back. And so he is groveling and asking and begging for forgiveness. And he does. With astonishing compassion, yes. Yeah, you're forgiven. I'm like, really? Woohoo! And he moves out. That day, maybe the next day, he finds a guy who owes him $5,000 to $10,000 and a little bit less. And says, I need my money now. Well, I can't pay that back. To jail you go. He's just been forgiven. But it didn't penetrate. He has a different alternative motion. I don't know what it is, but it didn't penetrate. Somebody saw it, went back to the master and said, hey, that guy, he didn't seem to show the same forgiveness you did. So they hauled him back in front of him. And says, you wicked man, he says. You wicked, wicked, evil man. How in the world can you go about not showing the same kind of mercy I just showed you? I can't believe this. I can't believe this. And with anger, he says, he handed him over to be tortured until he could pay his entire debt. Stop there. We just said it's an impossible debt to pay back. And the words he's using, to be tortured until. Eternal damnation is what this is. Eternal damnation. That's important because what the next verse says, that's what God's going to do to us. Eternal damnation if you have no mercy to give in the context in which we understand mercy right now. Right? It's not a warning, I was going to say, it's not a threat. It's kind of a reminder and a warning for those of us that go to church, that give our money and sort of check the blocks like the one priest probably does. But we like to hold on to the grudge and bitterness. Grudges. So I saw this on Facebook the other day about grudges. It says, I don't hold grudges. I remember facts. Let's not get confused, though. Let's not get confused. Things don't turn out well. If we nourish hatred, cherish animosities, live in settled malice and foster bitterness, those kind of people need to... I'll do that from time to time. I'll make those mistakes. It's like kind of one of those knee-jerk things. Breathe a little bit. Breathe. We're not a person. We're a people. We're not going to be Jesus. We're trying to work that way. Right? There are a couple of disclaimers here. Every now and then you'll have a person who's... I've met a few of them. And they'll forgive this person. They've treated him badly. Forgive them. They do it again. Treat him badly. Forgives them again. Happens over and over. Sometimes it gets a little numbing. And you can understand that. The fact that you're shown this mercy means you've got grace in the first place. We can understand your frustration. Another time is when you just went through whatever travesty it was, and you're still working through it. You can't really properly respond when you're trying to work through it. There's only so much we can process at one time. That warning is not for you either. It's for everybody else. We can't live a life like those two guys over that dollar. That's not the definition of our lives. That's not it. We can forgive under any circumstance. Pastor, there's some things that are just too big. I would like to disagree with you. Take Miss Corrie ten Boom, for example. This is her living conditions when she was in a concentration camp in Germany. Her sister also. This place is called Ravensbrück concentration camp. That's where she was for a little while. She wrote a book. The book is called The Hiding Place. And she writes about a particular situation of meeting a guard after it's all over with. And this is what I want to write, because she wrote some things in here. I don't know if she studied the Beatitudes the way we are, but she wrote a couple things that sound like exactly what Jesus is talking about with the Beatitudes. And I want to go ahead and read this real quick. It says, it was at church service in Munich that I saw him, the former SS man who had stood guard at the shower room door in the processing center at Ravensbrück. He was the first of our actual jailers that I had seen since that time. That kind of means she may have seen others. But this is the first. And it says here, and I'm going to go ahead and deviate, that all the memories came flooding back at that very instant. And she says, the room full of mocking men, the heaps of clothing, Betsy was her sister who died at Ravensbrück, the pain, blanched face that she had. She continues, he came up to me as the church was emptying, beaming and bowing, and said, how graceful I am for your message, Fraulein, he said. To think that, as you say, he washed my sins away. The problem with that if I'll stop right there, and with books, is I don't know the context behind this. Is he mocking, or is he being... It'll be clear in here in a minute, though. Right? His hand was thrust out to shake my hand. And I, who had preached so often to people the need to forgive, kept my hand at my side. Right? Even as the angry, vengeful thoughts boiled through me, I saw the sin in them. That's important. She saw her sin. Jesus Christ had died for this man. How can I ask for more? Lord Jesus, I prayed, forgive me and help me forgive this man. I tried to smile. I struggled to raise my hand. I could not. I felt nothing, not the slightest spark of warmth or charity. So again, I breathe the silent prayer. Here's the line I want you to remember. It plays into what we're talking about. Jesus, I can't forgive him. Please give me your forgiveness. And as I took his hand, the most incredible thing happened. From my shoulder, along my arm, through my hand, a current seemed to pass from me to him, while into my heart sprang a love for this stranger that almost overwhelmed me. He called him stranger because originally she saw him as the SS soldier who stood guard at there. But that's not what he is now, because we are a new creation. And she has never met this man before now, because he is now a new creation, a stranger, a new creature. And when she looked through the eyes of Jesus, which she asked and begged for, the mercy was just powerful right through her. If forgiveness is absolutely possible under any condition, depending on your position. Right? If you're a Christian, regardless of what has happened to you in the past, forgiveness is possible for you to have. Right? By God's grace. It's not within ourselves. You're going to have to probably sit in front of the throne and understand you don't have the Spirit to do so. She didn't. She asked for it. God, I don't have it within me. Please give me your strength to forgive him. Through you, she said. That's where she's at. Right? She saw her sin. Man, she was sorry about that. And the Lord gave her a meekness, the strength to be able to be the kind of love that Jesus and God needed her to be. And she really thirsted. You could see the thirsting in her for the righteousness. And merciful was plenty on that day. It is amazing the way the Beatitudes are lined up for each and every one of us. It's amazing. Here's a question for us to think on this week. In the context in which we understand it right now, are we merciful? Not do we want to be, are we? Let's go to Lord in prayer.